Hello, welcome to Tammy's Table. I am so excited that you guys decided to join us today. Let me just set the tone. Think about the last great party you went to. Where does everybody end up? In the kitchen, at the table, sharing wisdom, learning from elders, nurturing our young people, teaching skills that they don't teach in school. And that's really what Tammy's Table is all about. It's giving people information that they need to be resilient and to not just survive, but really thrive. And today I am super excited to invite my very good friend, Ed Blunt, on the show. Hey, Ed.
What's up, Queen T? How you living?
Living good. I'm living good. Um, wow, I don't even know where to start. So Ed is a phenomenal motivational speaker. He's a trainer. He's an entrepreneur. Um, he's amazing, and I know you're gonna like him as much as I do. So, Ed, let's dive right into it because we don't have like all that much time. Is that okay?
Sure, absolutely.
All right. So, I've been sort of focused on resilience and building resilience, and I do think it's a skill that can be taught. Do you believe that?
100%, yes.
Yeah. So, when I turn on the news, which I try not to do too much, everything is upside down. Like the world is upside down. Politics are crazy. Um, I think we need resilience more now than ever before. Um, and I wanted to know from you, you have one of the strongest minds I've ever encountered. You're extremely disciplined. Water rolls off your back like a duck when it's something bad. How do you teach resilience? Like what would you tell somebody? Like where do you even start?
I think that the first place to start is your foundation and getting clarity on what your values and the principles are that are going to govern your life. And that is all choice. We have the opportunity to tap root into a tradition of resiliency if we look at our ancestral track. Everybody has a different lineage, but everybody has people in that lineage that were supreme overcomers that endured storms and trials and tribulations that are far greater, in my humble opinion, than most of the things that we have to contend with today. So I think it starts with your foundational principles and values that you are going to subscribe to. And then the second piece of it is understanding that you have to be about something bigger than yourself. You talk about entrepreneurialism, you talk about being a leader, being in free enterprise. Well, there's always going to be levels of success and levels of challenge. And I'm more interested in how I show up in others when it's difficult. It's easy to be cool when everything is going well. Um, and I give you an example. I coached my son's basketball team, and we had an all-star game this past weekend. And one of the things I teach the team is about mental toughness. Well, because it was an all-star game, I had some players that I don't normally coach. And one of these players, who was very talented, was on the bench, and he was whining and complaining because we were losing. Because when you coach all star, you don't have time to practice. You don't really have time to build chemistry. So I was okay with whatever was going to happen, but we were getting our butts kicked basically. And he literally said, "Man, I don't even care about this game." I said, "What did you just say?" "I don't care about this game." I was like, "All right, well, you need to sit down, and you're just going to be there for the rest of the game." And he couldn't believe, as the game went on, like all kids do, because he's probably 13 years of age or whatever, 12, 13. He's like, "Can I go back in?" Because you know how kids are. They say dumb stuff and then they automatically like act like we ain't supposed to act like
I
they just
forgot.
said that. And so I said no. And the game ends. He's moping. And I said, "Where's your mom?" And I went right over to her and I said, "I want you to understand why I benched your son," because it was clear he was the most talented kid on the court. I said, because he said that he doesn't care about the game. I mean, his mother, when she said, "Did you really say that?" He was like, "Yeah." She went in. And the whole point is that I think today we have a lot of that that is permeating at a cultural level. Like, people are so easily offended. People are so ready to throw their hands up and play victim and complain. And it's always somebody else's fault. Why are you doing this to me? The victimization. I mean, it's a theme that people are riding all the way to the bank. And when you talk about the COVID bailouts and the how people were just chilling and like all that stuff is connected, Tammy. It's connected. So if you don't have the opportunity to even exercise resiliency, then there's no way you're going to be able to cultivate it on your own because you're too freaking comfortable. So I do believe it starts with the foundational principles, but it also has to be incumbent upon you to make some empowering choices about the path that you're going to exemplify and embody in your life.
That's so interesting. My daughter, so we both have kids. My daughter is 17 now, and she was coming home complaining that her teacher knocked off X amount of points off of her paper.
Mm,
And I was like, "Why'd she do that?" She said, "Because it was late." So I was like, "What are you complaining about? Like, this is pretty straightforward. Like, what was your role in that paper being late? Like, that's why she knocked the points off. What's this conversation that we're having?"
mm,
So I feel like part of it is also being accountable, right, for your own actions. Like
yep.
that whole thing during COVID, people getting free money and not working and sitting on the couch and binge watching Netflix. We literally enabled our entire society.
Hmm.
We're enablers.
Yeah.
I understood the need for it because businesses were closing, but like that's enabling behavior, which I think is the antithesis to resilience,
Yeah.
right? If people, even that, I like that you benched that kid.
Mm,
Um, But I also think, like, children in particular, if we think about our youth, I don't think they have any accountability. I think they whine and complain a lot, but that doesn't build your resilience muscle.
no. No.
So what is resilience in kids? Is it different than what it is in adults?
I think it's a question of what we prioritize as parents. And I love having these conversations when we're at functions, school functions and play dates and all of that, because part of our instinct is to want to provide a better path for our children than what we had. But we also have a responsibility to create obstacles so that our children can grow. And I mean like intentional obstacles. So for example, one of the conversations that I have with my son is I said, listen, when you turn 10, things are going to be very different. I just want, like I've been preparing him. You're not going to be able to get away with things the way you do now. So, if he leaves his socks on the floor, he only has to do 15 push-ups and he's got to pick them up and put them away. I was like, when you turn 10, it's not going to be that's going to increase the accountability factor increases because by now, me having to tell you 35, 600 times, whatever it is, like now we got to raise the bar on your accountability. We have to raise the bar on your expectation. And I see a lot of parents fall into this trap of because they had a very difficult life, whether you were talking about dysfunction in the home or violence and domestic violence or addiction. Well, then they swing the pendulum all the way on the other side and they treat their kids like bubble wrap. So
Mhm.
I think it's important for us to prepare our children. And I'm a big believer in martial arts. I'm a big believer in having discipline in the home. And you don't have to be a jerk about it. Like you don't have to be like you're gonna do what I say. It's not like that. It's just like, hey, no, son, like, here's what you did, here's the consequence. Let's get this done. So I think it starts there, but it has to be a priority for the parents. We have to understand that because here's the thing about parenting. You and I will never know if we were successful parents, because by the time that realization comes to light, we're going to be long gone, because it's going to show up in our grandkids and their kids. Like, we won't know. So we have to do everything in our power to really have our children understand legacy, playing the long game, and why those principles and values are so important, because those are the only things that you can clearly communicate from one generation to the next. You can literally pass on principles and values. And if you don't, you end up, having Conrad Hilton. I'm sure he never envisioned his great granddaughter making porn flicks. Like, you know what I'm saying? So that's why you gotta,
That was an accident.
pass
She
that on.
fell into that. What you just said is so interesting. There's two things. I have a million questions now. So I feel like I could look at my kids and know that they're successful right now because
Mhm.
I see some of their friends who are completely off the rails. Like they
Yep.
are definitely unsuccessful. So if you keep that thought in your mind and then you go back to your very first original statement,
Mhm.
you said it's in our lineage to be resilient. But what if you grew up in a household where it wasn't?
Mhm.
Like you didn't see strength. Like I'm blessed. Like I grew up, I saw strength on both sides, my grandparents, my parents. What if you're growing up in a house where there is no strength? Like you said, there is domestic violence or there is addiction, or how do you build a resilient mindset when you are surrounded by that all the time?
That's a great question. I was actually going back, meaning the only reason that we are here is because somewhere in that line, someone had to overcome some significant obstacles and hurdles in order to survive whatever they were surviving, whether if it was the typhoid flu or slavery. We can name a list of things down the line. Everybody's got an ancestral line. So whatever that is, if you go far back enough, you're going to identify strength and qualities of mental toughness, intestinal fortitude, and leadership that you can tap root into. So you can look beyond your immediate circumstances, your grandparents, etc. Because as we all well know, if you ask most people, I shouldn't say most, but if you ask a lot of people, hey, can you tell me something about your great grandmother and your great grandfather? A lot of people can't tell you anything because that wasn't really passed down. There was so much about just living day to day in survival mode. No one really had the foresight to think about, this what you and I are doing today is going to matter 200 years from now. And if we don't act that way, then our offspring and our lineage, they're not going to know anything about us, and that's our fault. So I think that's a combination of just saying, hey, if I come from a crappy situation, there it's a fact that if I look deep enough, and even if I don't know, exactly my family name, you can know your history. That's the beauty of history. You can find books and identify people that are of your cultural space, and find stories of inspiration, and you can tap root into that. And more importantly, they don't even have to be your culture and inspiration. A lot of people have been inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and they're not black. A lot of people have been inspired by Malcolm X and they're not black. A lot of people have been inspired by I mean, I could go on. So it's not necessarily specific to your race, but it could be specific to the culture that you come from.
So talk to me about building resilience in spite of your circumstance.
Yeah,
Because I think that is really challenging. I have not met many people that have done it. Like I haven't met them personally.
yeah.
Um, but if you're surrounded by like despair and you're
Hmm.
surrounded by people that make poor choices
Yeah.
over and over again, how do you break out of that? Like no one in that house is going to give you a book and say, "Hey, this is like your ancestors. Like this is where." That's not happening in that kind of household. You know what I mean?
That's true. And it's hard because part of our responsibility, you and I, is to bridge the gap, because the very people that would ask the question that you're asking are not likely to be listening to you and I have this conversation. So then we got to figure out ways to to infiltrate, if you will, into those areas that are disadvantaged. So, and I know you are an advocate of being involved in at a community level.
Mhm.
I do volunteer mentorship, excuse me, in certain schools because it's really the only chance that I'm going to have, and that's why I coach, because it's really the only chance I'm going to have to interact with youth that that have a good probability to be in some difficult circumstances. Outside of that, it's really about how do we how do we as individuals, so whoever's listening to this, the question is, if I know there are people that are probably living in a situation that they would deem hopeless, what opportunity can I create to infiltrate into their world and interrupt that story? And so everybody's got schools that are in your neighborhood, and you have some level of a community center in your neighborhood. And it's
Mhm.
so simple. All you got to do is go in there and say, "Hey, look,
Raise your hand.
I
Mhm.
live I live in the neighborhood. I would love just to, offer some mentorship or volunteer." And they will, I mean, they're going to say yes. So it's not that
Absolutely.
hard, but that's where it starts. Like, you and I have to be the arbiters of that change, because you're right. And I'm thinking of, when you asked the question, I was thinking about Reuben Hurricane Carter. I had a chance to spend 2 days with him, and when he was locked up for, I think it was a quadruple homicide that he clearly didn't do, but he
Didn't do.
spent 25, 26 years locked up for that. And I wondered, like, how did he have the resiliency to keep pounding his fist against the bars and keep fighting for his freedom when he, like, everybody had given up on that case. Everybody. He had no business having any inkling of hope that it was going to get overturned, but it did. Where does that come from? That's something that's greater than I believe a man or woman can describe. I don't know that we have the words to describe that level of spirit and fight. So sometimes it's just, there's something that's in you, and you don't recognize it until the circumstances force you to recognize it. He was forced to go so deep within himself. He didn't have any choice but to live that out, and that perpetual fight until he came to resolution. I promise you, 99 out of 100 people would have, committed
Given up.
suicide or resigned themselves that they were going to die in prison.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back to like my first question.
Yeah,
Can resilience be taught, or is it something that's just in you?
both, both. It can be taught, because if you talk to your, because Haley was doing volleyball, right?
Yep.
And whatever sports, I think sports are amazing for kids, for that one for the reason you're asking the question, because you learn resiliency in sports, especially if you have a good coach. Not everybody's gonna have a good coach, I know, but if you have a good
Absolutely.
coach, you learn resiliency, because you're gonna have to overcome some difficult challenges in the world of competition, in the world of practice and working on your skill set, and overcoming fatigue and muscle failure.
Yeah.
Like, you have no choice but to learn resiliency just through the vehicle of athletics alone. So I know it can be taught, but I do know that there are certain people that didn't have those things, and they still have that spirit. It's clear.
Mhm. That's so interesting. I am a huge fan of sports, as you know. Um, I have I've coached, I've sat on the benches and watched other people coach. Um, I'm a fan. I don't know why we don't do this, but you remember back in the day when we had like the physical fitness challenge, like the president's physical fitness challenge,
Yeah.
and everybody played sports?
Mhm.
I feel like part of what's happened like recently is that there's screens and there's monitors and there's like so many distractions.
Hmm.
So maybe we're not instilling that same level of resilience because not as many kids are playing sports. If you
Well,
look at the numbers, all the numbers are down.
yeah, they're getting it in a different format, virtually, and as you talked about, they're building community online. They're building play dates and play groups online. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but I do think because of the amount of time that takes, it takes away from physical activity. So yeah, there are opportunities, and obviously, we're not. I don't know the numbers on this because clearly we are still a force to be reckoned with when it comes to sports culture. We still are producing a phenomenal crop of athletes every single year, like that's evident. But I do think we could do better. Yeah, I do agree that technology, as useful as it is at times, it can also be the great distractor for sure.
That's the detriment. Um, okay, so let's get down to brass tacks. Not
Hmm.
that we haven't. Let's say I'm a total newbie
Yeah.
and I get crippled by adversity, which is
Mm.
really what I'm trying to fight here. Like something goes wrong, I can't get out of bed, or I'm crying my eyes out, or why me, woes me.
Mhm.
Um, what do you think like the 5 steps are? Give me like 5 solid pointers that you could like tell somebody like, hey, here's how to start turning around like that attitude and building a mindset, a resilient mindset.
Well,
I'm challenging you. I'm challenging you in this
you're
interview.
you're you're not
He's
gonna
like,
like
damn, I'm in the car. I'm at CVS.
you're not gonna like the answer. You won't like it. Step number one is to get up and go for a run. Step number two, and I want you to get up before the sun and go for a run. Step number two is to get up before the sun and go for a run. Step number three is to get up before the sun and go for a run. Step number four is you can get up, do some push-ups before the sun, and then go for a run. Step number five is to get up before the sun, do some push-ups, sit-ups, and squats, and then go for a run. And the reason I say that is because people they get caught up in all of these prescriptions and quote unquote whatever they think the steps are. When in reality, they have to go within. They gotta take some time to deal with themselves. When you go for a run and it's just you, well then you don't have anything, there's nowhere for you to go. You only have yourself to consult with as your body is going through this difficult dynamic of constant nonstop movement, and you're also having to be mindful of your breath because you may or may not be in certain level of shape and conditioning. But something happens if you do that every day. Something starts um, to break open inside of you, because now you're exercising a level of discipline. You're not thinking, you're just doing. And all of a sudden you start to realize that your mind doesn't run you. You actually are in charge of your mind. The reason people fall into that woe is me and that whiny wimpy place is because the mind knows all of our escape hatches. It knows all of our weaknesses, all of our insecurities, all of our doubts, and it will exploit it to the fullest. And anytime we get uncomfortable, anytime there's any level of difficulty. So you have to override that. You have to retrain yourself to start taking back control of your mind instead of your mind controlling you. You can walk around and look at people just how they look, how they show up physically, and I can tell you immediately who's in charge. Oh, your mind is in charge because you're a hot mess. Your mind is in charge because you're breathing heavy. You just walk from here to here. So it starts there, and it's painful. It is lonely. It is suffering. It is solitude. It is sacrifice. It is all those things that are not sexy. I can't give it to you in a soundbite that's going to make you want to chew it. It's bitter tasting. It doesn't go down easy. It doesn't taste good, but it's the truth. And the truth is the only way that you're going to get to where you need to be. And if you're not willing to do that and you keep trying to find some easily digestible self-help book or a very pleasant sounding interview with some tips that you think sound good, oh yeah, I could do that, you're not going to get to the truth. You
Mhm.
might do it for a day or two, but you will not stick with it. So until you're ready to get down in the mud and get dirty and follow instruction, because see, some people might be hearing me talk right now and they're like, I hate to run. It's too cold outside. I'm not running. That's stupid. I'm not doing that. Well, yeah. Well, that's why you have the mindset that you have, and you have the situation that you have right now, because everybody's got 10 parts of thinking and one part of action. It doesn't work that way. It's one part of thought, 10 parts action. That's when you start to take control again. But that's just the way that I know to get to the truth and the heart of the matter. That's what enables me to handle when things are not good, when things are challenging, when things are difficult, because they're going to be that. And because I'm focusing on where I'm going, I know the future, I know my vision. So that's a starting point and answer to your question.
That's it. Yeah, that was a bad answer, but it was the right answer. I think it's I mean, honestly, I think it's really scary for people to spend time with themselves.
Yeah.
When to look in the mirror and say, like, what's my role in this? Like,
Hmm.
what could I have done differently?
Hmm.
Um, I think that self exploration is the hardest part of all of it's so much easier to blame somebody else. It's so
Yeah.
much easier to, blame I'm a victim of circumstance. Um, but I like what you said. Like I'm not getting up before the sun because I'm not a morning person, but I think it's really important to spend time with yourself every day. Um, and ask yourself those tough questions. Like, how did
Yeah.
I get here? What was my role in this?
And see, I'm curious, I'll push back. I would be so curious to know what your experience would be of getting up before the sun, 5 days in a row and doing that. Because you're doing the exact opposite of something that is a part of your wiring. In your wiring, you've built in a belief that I'm not a morning person. I don't even know what that means because everybody gets up in the morning. But whatever that means to you, if you do the opposite of that, I would love to know what it looks like on the other end. I'd be so curious to see, right? It's
Okay,
kind of like,
well, listen, I'll tell you, I'm on the other end. You're up before the sun. I mean, I was up before the sun the last couple of days, but I like to go out at night,
you're
like
not at.
at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning,
Mhm.
with the dog. And that is where I do like my Tammy time. Um,
Well, that's
I-
up before the sun. That's still morning.
somewhere,
That's
somewhere
morning.
it's morning.
That's morning.
Um, but listen, I think you mentioned something that I hope people like heard. Whether you're getting up before the sun and running, or you're doing me walking a dog at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, it's a
Mm.
discipline.
Yeah.
It's a mental discipline to reprogram your mind.
Hmm.
And I think to ask like those tough questions that maybe we know the answers to, but we don't want to.
Yes.
Um, that's why I said when I introduced you, I think you're one of the most disciplined people I've ever met. And that is, I think, one of the big differences between being weak-minded and having a resilient mindset.
Agreed. Agreed. Because discipline it's not a personality trait. It's a
No.
choice, right? We just have to implement it. You're not gonna feel like doing this. I don't feel like doing a lot of the stuff that I do. I would say, maybe 60% of the time, I have no desire to do the things that I do. But it has nothing to do with my feelings. If we all did what we felt like doing, then I mean, what
Mm.
would our lives look like? So it's an opportunity for everybody to find that next level within ourselves, to level up, if you will.
Good stuff. Hey, what are you working on? Where can people find you? Like, put out your plugs. I think you're awesome, and everybody would
I
benefit from
listen,
following you.
I appreciate that. Right now, we're in the midst of significant transition. I was recently asked to do a training call and for a friend who owns a company. And I did this call, and there was just an organic connection. Sometimes you find yourselves in situations where you align with people, and it's unexpected, but you recognize it. If you've been doing things long enough, you can pick things up pretty quickly. And so I'm in the midst of doing some very important work with virtual healthcare, or virtual health, if you will, access. And
Hello.
uh, yeah, I mean, it's that's a component of it, but it's more than that because of what we offer, but in the culture that we're building with it. But so there's that. I continue to speak, teach, and train. The best way to find me is at Ed Blunt, EDBLUNT, on Facebook and Instagram. But yeah, like I connect with people all the time in different parts of the world. I love building community. I love being of service, and I love each day just having the opportunity to get a little bit better, to dig a little bit deeper.
You're awesome, Ed. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
For having me. Thanks for having me. It's good seeing you.
Good seeing you too. It's been a minute.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Hey, this is Tammy. Thanks for joining us today on Tammy's Table. And I look forward to seeing you back here next Monday at 12 o'clock.
This work is subject to copyright owned by Affinity Global LLC. Any reproduction or republication of all or part of this is expressly prohibited unless Affinity Global LLC has explicitly granted its prior written consent. All other rights reserved.